Okay, let's make a start. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for today's class. If you remember, we've gone through the definition of leadership in the first session, what it is and what it isn't, how it's different to management. We then talked about types of leadership and the various theories of leadership that are really helping us understand how leadership as a concept has evolved, especially in the modern day over the last 100, 150 years. And now we are talking about, what does global leadership means? And global leadership really is what the title of the module is. So with these three sessions, we would have defined our terms. After that, of course, we can then get into how you develop yourself as a leader, how you develop other people as leaders, how you make cross-country moves, how you manage change as a leader, modern leader, what responsible leadership is, all those other modules still to come. And we're getting into the finer details of it. But this session today also is about defining what we're talking about. So it's quite important to have that as a shared idea before we get into the details. The session today is going to have a guest speaker. The guest speaker is a gentleman called John Gildard. And he is going to be joining us at 12:15, so about 8 minutes. He is the Director General of the Institute of Directors, and a very, very interesting person because he's been working around the world. He lived 10 years in China, and he's quite an action man. He's been running leadership in the outdoors, and he's been a leader of an expedition into the Arctic. So he's got a lot of very interesting stories about leadership in terms of managing multi-national teams. Clearly, in his current role as the head of the Institute of Directors, he is very much involved in what does good leadership look like in a global sense. And he'll be sharing that with us as well. Now, it's going to be earlier than we normally have guest speakers, but we have to fit in with the times that individuals are able to give us. And like I said, very grateful that we can have someone of John's caliber coming and speaking to us today. It'll be about a 20-minute speech and then 10 minutes for questions and answers. So please do make notes of any questions that come up, and then ask him the questions, at the end of the session. And then at that point, we'll just carry on with our own lecture, and all the material, of course, will be on Minerva. You can access it all. Of course, if there's any specific questions or any specific issues, you're always able to come back to me. I'll be very happy to hear from anyone who has any particular questions or any particular ideas that they want to share with me, whether on the email or if you're linked in with me, then on LinkedIn. So let's just go straight into the presentation. We're now 10 people, so everyone's here. Wonderful. So I want to start by sharing with you this film. Let's talk about it afterwards.
Sorry, Professor, we cannot hear.
Hey, you can't see it. Hang on. I'm glad you told me that. Let me try again. Right. Share screen. TV film. Share. Go. If you can't see it, tell me.
No.
You can't see it? Oh, okay. Hang on one second.
So, without further
Can you hear
ado,
now?
let's address section 1.
You all right?
No, I'm having a bit of a nightmare, actually.
What's the matter?
Well, I've got all the international CEOs from around the world in this room.
Good.
10 minutes, the annual summit is supposed
I
to
had
take
this-
place. They've flown thousands of miles to get here, and my translator hasn't turned up. I need to find someone who can translate into 7 different languages.
Well, I can do that. Yeah, I did a TEFL him, I got you.
Welcome back to London, ladies and gentlemen. This is Helen Marsh, who will be our interpreter today. So, without further ado, let's address section 1.1, multinational profiteering for the financial year 2005-2006. Helen.
Gurdy, gurdy, gurdy. Gurdy, 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 gurdy. Oh, bud, bud, bud. Bud, bud. Dice, e la no, ma no, sai cosa ta dici, vado.
So, who exactly is this film making fun of? It's not making fun of the people sitting around the table. They all look really intelligent. They all look really professional. It's making fun of the individual who is really wrapped in the stereotype, a caricature, if you will, of the nations that are around that table. And oh, hello, John. How are you? You know, we will talk about the concept after John has started his presentation. I want to welcome him to this session on Zoom. He was very kind to give us his time yesterday as well, which was brilliant. And he's very kindly agreed to share with us his expertise and his experiences of global leadership and his insights into global leadership today as well. I have been very, very impressed by not just his knowledge, but also his energy and his experience of the outdoor. And he will tell us about the relevance of that in terms of global leadership and leadership of multinational teams. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome him to this session and pass the floor on to John.
Well, thanks, Masood. That's great. And maybe a couple of people, Ash, for example, making quite a lot of noise there. If you could possibly put yourself on mute, that will probably help others to be able to hear me. That's great. Thanks so much. So I can see quite a number of different names that look like maybe I should be saying Dajahao, as well as hello to you all. So I can explain why maybe I have a little Putonghua in a moment. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Forgive if I have any background noise. I'm currently sitting in the Institute of Directors in London, in Pall Mall, where I am they call it the Director General, but that's essentially the CEO of the Institute of Directors. And I'm going to cover a little bit about what that institute is and what the institution is in a moment as well, to give you some insights into how I am and the reason why I'm talking to you today in this regard. So maybe a little bit of history to me, because that might be quite useful in terms of giving you some texture around why I might have something of interest to say about working internationally. So I spent the last 30 years in business, and more latterly, I was appointed as the Director General of the Institute of Directors here in the UK at the end of 2019, just in time for COVID. So that's been an interesting education, and I'll cover a little bit more about what the Institute does in a moment. Previous to that, I spent 10 years in China, which is why I have a little understanding of Chinese language. And also, I was responsible for rebranding Grant Thornton internationally for the whole of the world. So I worked in 60 different countries, bringing 60 different countries together around and aligning around one brand. So I was very fortunate to be able to experience very many different cultures. And prior to that, I was 16 years as a consultant with PwC. So again, not only in the United Kingdom, but also working with teams around the world. As Masood has said, I have a little experience in the outdoors. So in 2006, I walked to the North Pole. I've done climbing in the Himalayas, and also I'm a qualified outdoor mountain guide in the UK, and have done quite a lot of work with teams in quite difficult circumstances in the outdoors. So my experience really spans a great deal of different countries, a great deal of different experiences. And I hope today I can give you a little bit of insight into my journey and why, maybe some of the lessons that I've learned in dealing with international management. So I mentioned earlier the Institute of Directors, and it's useful that I just maybe mention a little bit about what the Institute does, because that also gives you some texture for the conversation today. So the Institute of Directors was set up in 1903. It was awarded a royal charter in 1906. So it's been around for well over 100 years. And its reason for being is to improve the quality of directors in the United Kingdom and indeed internationally. So our purpose is better directors for a better world. So we work with organizations not only in the UK, directors not only in the UK, but also internationally, around how we can support them in their learning and development around good governance and effective responsibilities, discharging their responsibilities as directors. We work with government, so we work with the UK government. In fact, last night I was here in London hosting Kwasi Kwarteng, who is the Secretary of State for Business in the UK, and we regularly interact both with Kwasi but also with other ministers, including Rishi Sunak, around what is necessary for a productive environment for business in the United Kingdom. So that's a great privilege. It comes with the position. It's not because of me, it just comes because the Institute of Directors is one of 5 main business organizations that advises government on the development of a prosperous environment in which business can prosper. So internationally, I just wanted to really give you a sense of a flavor around about teams and how international teams might work. And I've been privileged to work with teams in as far different locations as Colombia, New Zealand, China, South Africa, Argentina, many different places, Canada, US, etc., as well as the UK. Both in terms of in business, but also in terms of working with teams in exploration. So I've also been for many years until relatively recently a member of an international motorsport team as a navigator in a rally sport team for nearly 20 years. So what I really want to just give you a flavor of is to, for a moment, if you like, close your eyes and imagine something. Imagine that it's minus 60 degrees, that it's cold, that there's nothing around you but snow, that you are with a small team of people walking across ice, pulling 90 kilograms of weight behind you in a sledge and skiing to the North Pole. Minus 60 degrees is enhanced by a wind. The wind takes the temperature below minus 70 to minus 80 degrees. It's cold, you're tired, you're hungry, and all you want to do is sleep at the end of 8 hours skiing, which you've been doing for nearly a month. You're in a tent, and someone goes out to quickly take the call of nature and comes back into the tent and very quietly nudges me because I'm near the door and says the word that no one really wants to hear, which is bear. Now, polar bears are the top of the food chain in the Arctic. They are very interested in 16 people sleeping in a tent in the middle of the Arctic because that's 16 seals that they could eat, because you look like a seal when you're ensconced in a very warm sleeping bag in a tent. But all that is between you and the bear's teeth is a very thin area of plastic covering the sheet that is the tent. So we slowly rouse ourselves, slowly increasing the amount of noise we're making. And we slowly go outside into minus 70 degrees in order to confront a bear that is hungry. A young bear, you can tell a young bear because although they're white, the translucent nature of their hairs means that whilst they keep warm, you can also see the body color underneath the hair, which is yellow, because he's thin, he's hungry, and he's interested in eating. The whole purpose of that is to frighten him away. So you make a lot of noise, you may create a great V shape in front of him to look like a very large animal that he really doesn't think he can eat, and you frighten him off. But you have to wait because he's the top of the food chain. He will come back to see why he was frightened, and then you send him away again with a lot of noise. You don't fire guns because that just sounds like the cracking of the ice, which he hears every day of his life. But you make a lot of noise that is alien, that makes him frightened, and quite frankly, is not going to take on something the size of 16 people together. Now, the only reason I mention that is that teams are not really teams until they're in adversity. And this is something that happens around the world. I've seen this happen in teams in motorsport, in exploration, in climbing, and also in business. Particularly this last year, leading the IOD through the period of COVID has again taught me that teams aren't really teams until really your backs are to the wall. You have no option but to make the cost cutting you need to do, to change the business model that you have, and to think differently about the way you operate. And that's something that internationally is even more difficult when you're dealing cross cultures. And really what I want to offer you today is the notion that when everything else is dealt with, the most important thing in building a good, sound organization internationally is one word. And that word is trust. And trust is built through respect, through mutual respect. Chinese colleagues will know the word guanxi, this deep, enduring relationship you build on the back of trust that allows you not to have contractual arrangements, but allows you to build a connectivity with somebody that allows you to do something with them in trust that will build a business and take it forward, or in your personal life that will build your relationships to take your life forward. And that really is at the heart of great business internationally. You build trust through respect, you build trust through building relationships, and you build relationships by trying to build understanding. And the understanding comes not only from being able to speak a little of the language and showing due deference and due respect to that language understanding, but also the culture. So when I was in China, I spent a lot of time traveling in China. I read a lot of the Chinese classics. I tried to learn the language. And wherever I've gone in the world, I've tried to have a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of German, a little bit of French, a little bit of Greek, in order to just to show that I really do care about the people I'm working with and be thoughtful and respectful to what they have in their culture, because my culture just happens to be English. Their culture just happens to be Greek. And together, by finding a common purpose in the way we operate, we can find a way forward. And that really, to me, is the heart of international business. It's not just about the economics, although of course that's important. It's not just about the sales figures, although those are essential. It's not just about cost management, although that's very important. It's what is that underpinned by? What makes a real difference in a team, particularly in a period of adversity or a period of growth, which also is challenging? It comes from the deep mutual respect that you build as individuals. And that's been quite difficult during the period of time we've had in the last 2 years with COVID, because of course we've been operating on Zoom, we've been operating like this. And building a relationship, building trust, building integration, building real, true, deep, enduring relationships is very, very difficult when you can't have the tactility and the connectivity, if you like, the chemistry that exists between human beings when we sit in the same room or we shake each other's hand or we are close to each other, because that chemical interaction is super important for people. And because we are naturally gregarious and social animals, therefore we crave that connectivity. We crave that not only in our families, but in a business environment, because that also, the intangible element of chemistry also builds trust and relationships. And that's been one of the things that we've lacked through COVID. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of the enduring relationships that I created as an individual throughout my history have come into force now. I've made the difference when I've needed to do things with this organization, or I've needed to build further relationships. It's come through Guangxi. It's come through my history, my connectivity, and my openness to cultures. So people will turn around and support me and help me in doing things that I never dreamed they would have done. And I give you an example this morning. So here I am in London. I stayed overnight, came across on the tube from my hotel. I met a person I've known for nearly 25 years. Now that person I hadn't seen for quite some time, but we pick up our conversation as if it's just yesterday. So I've known them for 25 years, but I haven't seen them for over 2 years. But we pick up that conversation because we know each other, we've worked together, and we knew that we needed to support each other in something we want to do now. So it's not just about that relationship and that connectivity and that history, but it's about the chemistry. And that makes an enormous difference. It allows you to do things, particularly in these circumstances we find ourselves in now, to do things you may not have ever dreamt you could have done. So as I kind of close in this outline, I'll allow maybe some conversation around questions, which I'm very happy to answer. And what would I leave you with in terms of the fundamental of being able to operate internationally? Building trust, building trust, building trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Fantastic. Absolutely agree with every word, and is the theme that we're going to be continuing for the rest of the lecture, how to create that, how to build it. Let's take some questions. You may ask your questions now.
I've never known students be shy. So please do ask a question. You know, I've given you lots of things from motorsport to China to Colombia to the IOD to working with government. There must be a question you have, and I'm very happy to answer any question you have.
Perhaps I could start off, if that's okay, warm up the conversation. We've, of course, been going through a period of globalization for a long while, and the importance of building those relationships across boundaries has grown over the last few decades. What do you think is the impact of post-COVID world and, of course, Brexit in UK in that trend going forward?
It's a really good question, and there are two different components to that. So one is around Brexit, and one is around, if you like, the post-COVID world. Brexit has brought with it a lot of trials and tribulations in the UK, as I think people observing the UK from a distance would agree. Within the UK, and this has happened more recently with the Conservative Party conference and the changes of politics that are going on right now in the United Kingdom. Basically, post-Brexit, the business of business is now having to align around a potentially environment of higher wage costs. Now, the government is holding its line on essentially refusing to allow business to import low-cost labour from Europe, which it used to do. Now, the government don't quite understand the economics of business, so their rather blunt instrument to the problem that they have is, well, just pay more. Of course, if you pay more, the costs go up. If the costs go up, you have to transfer those costs probably to the consumer. And if you do that, it means prices go up and therefore you get inflation. So it's a fine balance that we're having to work with the government on at the moment in this post-COVID world. Of course, we have issues as well right now that have been caused not by Brexit really, but by the ancillary activities of Brexit. So we have the fuel crisis, we have lorry driver issue at the moment in the UK. But the government is holding its nerve. And having spoken to Kwasi last night, very much of that view that the government in the UK is going to hold its nerve. It's going to hold out for business to invest in people. So this is good news for students in the UK because there's going to be more opportunity for people to be able to move into businesses. We're interestingly, and I would suggest if you are interested, please do follow the IOD on LinkedIn, because you see a lot of the stuff that we do, because we're apolitical. We have no political affiliation at all. We're not funded by government. We have no interest in one political party or another. But Brexit is here to stay. Notwithstanding, we're going to probably see some changes to Article 16, and the government is flagging at the moment that they are going to question Article 16, which is going to cause us some other problems, but that's another issue. So right now, Brexit is here to stay. We are going to have continued problems with supply chains. We are going to have continued problems with lorry drivers. We are going to have continued price inflation, and the UK business community is having to ready itself for higher costs. Now, if you add to that the government's need to generate revenue in order to pay for the National Health Service, and nobody wants them not to pay for that, they are pushing prices up for costs for business in terms of national insurance as well, and a latent tax rise that's going to come in a year or so's time. So very complicated, but the simple answer is it ain't going away and we're going to have to live with it. So on Brexit, on the international kind of side, I think I forgot the question now, but that was the Brexit answer. You were asking me about
clearly, as an island nation, there was this concept of us and them potentially in the olden days, and as Britain has become more global, not just in terms of trade, European Union, but also food and culture and all the interfaces. Clearly that trend had gone, and I just wondered whether with Brexit we're going to have either slowing down of that particular trend or a reverse back towards us and them kind of mentality that doesn't help in building the trust that you talked about.
Yeah, I don't see that. I think that with the work that's been done by the government, although it can be a bit cack-handed, to use a good northern expression, a bit messy, the intention is probably right, which is to increase the alignment and connectivity with other countries in the rest of the world, including China. Although at the surface, the government tends to be quite vitriolic and anti-China, but underneath it all, certainly we're being asked to build business relationships where it's possible to do so. So the UK has to be an international nation. It can't survive without being international. So actually what the post-COVID world allows us to do is to use these mediums of online and a difference of travel approach and our previous relationships to build business. So I do actually think that rather oddly, COVID has been a friend. It's been terrible, and so many people have lost loved ones, but behind all that, it's allowed the United Kingdom, and indeed many different countries around the world, to change its mindset. So now there's a much greater openness to doing things differently. Behavioral science indicates that it takes about 21 days to change a habit. Well, we've had a lot of 21 days in the past 2 years. So the habits of business have changed. And I've seen this, that we're approached on an ongoing basis. We do private briefings to government, and certainly the briefings that we're doing at the moment are about the likelihood, if you like, of international trade improving and the readiness of British business to go out into the world. We see that happening. We see there's an increased enthusiasm for British business to look elsewhere. It is quite difficult right now because they tend to go, most businesses go to where the least line of resistance is. So they will tend to go to English-speaking locations. But we are also seeing with the increased diversity and ethnicity and cultural difference in the UK, there are now entrepreneurs that have got experience. They can speak Spanish, they can speak German, they can speak Chinese, they can speak Urdu, and therefore we are seeing opening up in perhaps a slightly different way than we anticipated, and that I think is for the good.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you for more questions, but before that, I was just going to say I hope you had someone from the Treasury in the meeting yesterday. But anyway, that's.
And I'm seeing Rishi on Monday, in fact, on the 18th. I'll be making my gentle points to him in my good Yorkshire way on Monday.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
And the Treasury do speak today, so I know that for a fact. So the rumours that you see in the media, don't believe all you read in the media.
No, I don't. I mean, I was talking last night to my friend who is the BBC producer, who was at both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, and he was giving me the lowdown of all the stories. Anyway, interesting times. We live in interesting times. So, dear friends, questions, please.
If you don't want to say anything, then you can always put something in the chat. I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
Yeah, please. Absolutely. Put it in the chat. Put the questions in the chat.
Otherwise, I think I can see that predominantly we have a very international group of people. So I look for the names and I can see Xu, Liu, Cheng, the Chinese. So I'd be interested in their perspective, maybe on what I've said later. But I would just say that I do think, although there are differences of opinion about the situation in China, certainly the appetite for business to do business in and with the Chinese is very high. We are not hidebound or constrained by politics. It is important. There are supply chain considerations, of course, how people will look at Xinjiang, but nevertheless, yesterday I was talking with the British Chamber of Commerce in China, and there is a definite appetite to have increased relations on a business footing with China, and indeed, of course, with other locations around the world. And I think that there is an increased openness from businesses in Britain to working with a much broader range of countries.
Of course. That's very good to know. Questions, anyone?
We've stunned people into silence. I hope I was not speaking too quickly or in an unclear way. Appreciate sometimes.
Well, we have the script running, so your words were being printed as you were speaking. But I thought you were very clear. Thank you very much. Any questions at all? Well, John, if there are no questions, I mean, I think your time is very valuable, so I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for spending the time with us and giving us this insight. Perhaps you'd just like to finish with your tip for the students about how to be successful global leaders.
No, happy to. So I noticed there's a question in the chat, which I'm very happy to answer as well.
Oh, is there? I can't see it.
So about building a difficult situation with my team? What's the quickest way to build trust? I would say, and then I can give you a sort of tip for other things, but the quickest way to build trust is to demonstrate you're authentic. You have to give a bit of yourself because you have to trust others before often they will trust you. So I would say, show a bit of your humanity, show a bit of yourself, and be humble.
All right. So let's go back to our lessons then. It seems to be running slow rather than stopping completely. John's point is extremely important, as I'm sure you agree. There is an awful lot that could be said for authenticity, for our ability to be trusted and to be trusting. And those are very, very important things for us to go through. Can you guys, are you able to see the screen now with the slides? If you can't see it, please let me know.
Sorry, I can't see it.
You can't see it?
Yeah, I can't.
Okay, because I've put it up. Let me see now. Do apologize about this. It's the usual issue with you are sharing your screen, it says, so it should be working. I can't see you guys either. Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get out and come back in to try and fix this. Because it's not, you know, it's all over the place. It's not working, but it's not even letting me get out. That's the problem. So we have a bit of a technology challenge at the moment. Bear with me, please. Let me see if I can fix this. Quit Zoom. I'll be back. Have I gone away? Haven't gone away yet. Oh God, what is going on? Task manager. Zoom meeting. Okay, I'm back. Is everything okay? Let me see if I can start sharing again this time. Okay, can you see now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hooray. We get there in the end. Sorry about that. Okay, so the subject for today was global leadership. We talked about that and the culture in general, because that's all part and parcel of it. Clearly, there are organizational cultures and multiple different cultures within a country. So when we talk global, we are definitely talking about, as the definition says at the bottom, working across national boundaries. But as we all know, national boundaries are arbitrary, and over history, they've changed. You know, the reality is that countries such as China, India, other places are continents, and they have as many cultures as Europe has. So when we talk about countries to an extent, it is not complete. There are an awful lot of variations within countries that we can talk about during today's session. However, because we don't have anything else that would allow us to really talk about the differences, we're going to stick to the countries as defined now. And we can then add color to that discussion between us by talking about the differences within the country. But for the purposes of this, we're going to talk about countries, if that's okay. So last time I left you with this idea of thinking about, are we all completely unique as individuals and as nations? Or are we all the same with just different wrappings? These are two different perspectives. Clearly, the truth is something in between. It's not absolutely uniqueness and absolutely we're all the same. But nevertheless, your perspective then determines whether you feel that you have a choice to be different, or no, you are stuck in the way that you're behaving because that's your nature. And that's how you were. I mean, for example, can bees choose to be ants? Can an ant, for example, choose to act differently to what is the nature of ants in how they behave? Naturally, the vast majority of ants and bees will behave in a consistent way, and yet there are individuals who may not be absolutely true to that particular stereotype. I often, when I meet people globally from their nation, I'm reminded that anyone who is international and either working globally, exposed to global culture, or traveling the world is by nature different to the majority of people from that country where they come from, who have not been outside their own unique environment. But this idea of appreciating other people's differences and really valuing them is core to being able to be successful as a global leader, because it takes what John said, humility and openness. And we'll talk about that later on. I want to just share this quote from Huxley with you. And the journey here in this particular slide is a metaphor. Because every time we're exposed to a different culture, whether on Zoom or reading a book or watching a film or anything else that's outside our own culture, in our mind, we're going through that journey. And if in that journey, we hold fast to what is the right way and wrong way based on our own experiences, then that ignorance, as I put it, as Huxley puts it, will stop us growing through that experience. But if you put away that prejudgment that you are right and everyone else is wrong, and your way and your cultural way is the only way, and you expose yourself to the alternative way of looking at the world, alternative way of doing things, that's how you grow. It's painful, it's not easy, it's not comfortable. We're clearly very comfortable with what we know. That's human nature. What we know is safe. What we know is predictable, and therefore not in any way putting you at risk. And yet, it is something that may well stop you growing. And being able to really assess your own values, assess your own situation with a new light, to see yourself through other people's eyes and to become more self-aware. And of course, you remember that from the first session where we talked about this, the critical point about being a great leader is that self-awareness. And knowing what we would like things to be like, what our default style is, and what our range is, frankly, what we're able to cope with, what we're not able to cope with. So I'm just going to ask you to share, if you want, how many of you worked in other countries or lived in other countries? Any of you? Put in the chat if you don't want to unmute, but I mean, if you do want to unmute, please do. Anyone?
So in other countries, right?
Yes. Thank you. Who? Yeah. What other country have you lived in?
Yeah, I lived
in any other country or worked in another country?
I lived in the United States for
wonderful.
Yeah, for my undergraduate student.
Okay, so tell me, what were the things that you found difficult in that situation?
Maybe it's language. The most different thing is language.
Okay.
And then I think it's food.
Food.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not easy, is it? I remember coming to UK and having to use knife and fork instead of spoon, and it was really, really difficult. How do you pick up rice with this knife and with this fork? Toilet habits. Oh my God! Don't even start me on that. It's very difficult. What did you find enjoyable?
Maybe as a party.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me what was good about it?
They like have a party during the weekend, and at first I don't like it, but after I joined them, I think it's a good way to communicate with your friends, and you can play games or you can you can drink alcohol with them, and it's a funny time to relax yourself.
Yeah. If you had to go and work in United States again, would you be more or less nervous than the first time?
I think I will be less nervous because I know because I know what should I do during my work.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's exactly the right experience that I think most people would have. Any of you who like scary movies, horror movies, you'd know that the monster you don't see, that you don't know, is far more scary than even a difficult situation or difficult challenge that you do see. Because your mind and your imagination come up with far worse and far more imaginatively risky situations than reality. And that's the same with global working. You know, those people out there, for all we know, they could be completely different to me and scary and dangerous and risky for me, my career, my future, my health. Often people who have not had exposure tend to see other people as scary. And that is part and parcel of nations demonizing other nations when they want to go to war, or where there's a competition between them for commerce or whatever else. They often portray them as those others who are bad in some way, and we are good, and we are righteous. That's what happens. And the majority of the people in the world don't travel. I mean, I think just taking about the United States, less than 6% of people in the US have passports. Less than 12% of people in Congress and Senate have ever been outside the country. And the country they would normally even go out to would be Mexico for holiday. So the proportion of Americans that you see around the world, they're the exception. They're not the norm. Most wouldn't have even visited the capital city of their states. And that's not unusual for a US. I'm prepared to say that the same thing happens in India, in China, in the Middle East, in South America, and the rest of the world. People are not as exposed. And if you have natural barriers, like you live on an island, or you have mountainous regions around you, or it's difficult to travel for whatever reason, political reason, economic reason, whatever, then that tends to exasperate that situation and create more of an us and them challenge, which is what I was talking to John about just now, about the British potentially looking at the rest of the world, living in an island. So in our situation, you will see that most of the time we create a cartoon of what other people are like. So here is some stereotypes, very European orientated. You do need to excuse me about that. But you think, okay, who are the best chefs? French. Who are the best mechanics? Germans. Who would be the, system orientated, fair policeman? British. I don't know about whether best lovers are Spanish or Italian. I'm not going to comment. But the best watchers and the most precise people are Swiss. And then you think, okay, this is what heaven would be like. What would hell be like? And you would say, oh my God, British cooking, although that's changed a lot, admittedly, French mechanics, French quality of cars, a German policeman. I'm not going to comment about the Swiss lover, and of course, Spanish and Italian watchers. These are just examples of caricatures, of stereotyping people. And there's something interesting about them. First thing is, almost all the stereotypes focus on the negative, not on the positive. They go out of their way to paint the worst picture that you can imagine about those other people, to make it to make them ridiculous, to make you look down on them in some way. Calling the Swiss bad at being lovers. I mean, that's really not something that if you were Swiss, you would say, yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't think they would. I think these stereotypes are ones that the people would, who they're attached to, would object to and would prove to be wrong in a lot of cases. So tend to be negative. It's very much about the average. And we'll talk about this. A lot of these countries are really different amongst themselves. I mean, if I lived in Italy for several years, and you can say that Italian city-states for about 1,000 years were autonomous. So the Venetians, the Lombards, the people in Sicily or whatever. I mean, and the country has been united for 250 years or thereabouts, and therefore, to say to a Italian from Milano that you are a opera singing, pizza eating, pasta making person who doesn't care about business or whatever and wants to have a good time, is something that they will find very offensive. And it would be totally untrue, having lived in Milan. And the same stereotypes about your own countries, about your own cultures from people outside who would want to make themselves feel good about themselves by creating negative stereotypes, especially of neighbors. Countries tend to be competing with their neighboring countries, and therefore the British have the worst stereotype for the French and the Germans, for example. And the same thing, I'm originally Iranian, and what the Iranians say about the Arabs and the Turks, for example, would be definitely very harsh compared to people further away. And those things tend to be based on what they consider to be the average in that environment. It does not represent all those people. Now, let's think about this. You have these stereotypes, and then you have all the generational changes. You have the differences between genders. You have the differences between social classes, the difference between levels of education, and definitely the differences in the regions within that area. So look at the stereotype that you're creating. How can they represent all of those people? And it doesn't help really understand things that would be useful to you in building that relationship of trust that helps you create a win-win business situation as a global leader. It doesn't. So what I want to do is I want to share with you one theory about how we quantify national cultures. Now, there are many different theories, and I have actually put another theory from another bunch of researchers onto Minerva, or will be putting them as soon as this lecture is over, for you to consider. Most of these theories have very common dimensions that you could actually look at They're different, using different words and different headings, but they're describing very similar things. The one I'm showing here is from Dr. Geert Hofstede, and he's a Dutch theorist who has been studying this for many years, not 10 years, I mean, far more than 10 years. I mean, I went through a course with this gentleman in 2006. So, you know, it's much older than that. I think my slide is wrong, actually. And this theory has also evolved and improved over time as more and more research has come in. But these are one model of how we look at culture across different countries in a way that might be helpful to us. Now, how will it be helpful to us? The first thing is that you try to understand what is their best way of communication, best way of persuasion, best way of getting them on board with what you want to do, whether as a leader or whether as a follower or as somebody who's just discussing business with them. And the second part, after knowing them and being able to quantify really how their preferences might be different to yours, is really looking at yourself and saying, what is my preference? Once you're aware of what their preference might be in way of communicating or dealing with business and the world, and what your preference is, then you have the chance to adjust yourself in order to be more successful as a global person and hopefully as a global leader. This is what we call emotional intelligence. Have you guys come across emotional intelligence in the past? Emotional intelligence is the idea that the original differentiator between people, which was IQ, which is very much about your ability to process information. And actually now there's the G theory of EQ, which is a whole range of different things that look at intelligence in general, is not as important as the way you emotionally deal with other people and yourself. So EQ is about understanding yourself. And it's very much about the Johari window. If you were in the lecture last week when we talked about it, you know, knowing what more about yourself and how others see you. And then knowing other people, insight about other people, and then coming up with a range of ways of behaving that gives you choice in how best to create a trusting, winning relationship with those people quicker and better than you would have done otherwise. So this is what I'm trying to do here with this model, which is about creating a way of quantifying and measuring so that you have a structure that you could use to adapt yourself to be more successful. So let's talk about the first dimension. It's called power distance, which is high versus low power distance. What's power distance? Power distance is referring to cultures that are hierarchical, where the higher up the system you are, the more position of power that you have, then you know, you have more influence. These create organizations that are more centralized, much more complex hierarchy, because the differences in status are very, very important to people. You have many grades within those companies, and lots of decisions are centralized or go up the chain to be decided. And people know their place in the system and they don't go beyond it. A flatter, lower power distance is a flatter organization. Individuals make their own decisions. People feel more connected to the more senior people. The more delegation tends to happen. So this is the first dimension, the power distance. So the whole idea is that the closer you are to the top power, to the source of power, the more power you will have by association. And it's not about the value that you're bringing, it's about your position within that structure, within that status. So Have a think about which countries you think, which cultures you think would have the highest power distance and which would have the lowest. What about your own? If you have a piece of paper, write down what you think your own culture would be in terms of power distance. Will it be very power centric, or will it be a low power centricity? Just note that down somewhere. Let's have a look at the map, see what the research says. So as you can see, UK, Germany, the Nordic countries, America, Canada, will have a relatively, and Australia will have a relatively low power centricity. Certainly countries like Netherlands that I lived in are very, very low in power centricity. Some countries, Arab countries, Russia, African countries, Mexico have much higher power centricity. And China clearly is also quite power centric. Does that sound true to you? Anybody want to challenge it? Anyone thinks this is wrong? Remember everything I said. This is a massive generalization. And yet this is what all the research has found, that in general, overall, it's this is how power centricity sits across the world. So let's move on. If there's no question, I'm not seeing any question. If there are, I'm not seeing any chat at the moment. So please don't assume I'm seeing it because it's not showing up on my screen. So you need to put a hand up, I think, if you have. All right, I can see the chat now. It's shown at the top. Okay, so I'm going to move on, if that's okay, to the second dimension: individualism versus collectivism. What this talks about is how important community is and how people feel comfortable going with what the majority decision is, as opposed to, no, I'm an individual, I will decide for myself. Now, that community could be your family, it could be the team that you're part of, it could be your religious group, it could be people, whatever, but it's your sense of identity of what community you feel you belong to. And in that situation, individuals who are very much in the collective culture will find it difficult to put their hand up and stand out and be different to their community, as opposed to countries where, no, it's the norm and people feel they have the right to have their own opinion and to be the master of their own roles and their own decision-making and to stand out. And the rest of the culture thinks it's okay. By the way, all of these dimensions go right across work, private life, and generally how you behave within that culture. So it's not just about work, but clearly it's highly relevant to leadership. In a situation where you have a collective culture, clearly the leader makes a decision, the rest of the team will just follow. Whereas in an individual culture, the leader would be far less of a directive potentially, and would be far more of a democratic leader, far more of an authoritative leader, creating a vision and then letting people help build that vision with them as individuals. My experience, for example, working in Netherlands was it's a very individual culture and everybody had their own opinion. They felt totally comfortable sharing that opinion and saying it, even if other people disagreed, even if the boss disagreed. And they own their own decision-making, their own jobs, and that's how it goes. When I moved from Netherlands to Turkey, no, Turkey was very much, certainly the company I was with, was far more of a collective culture, and people listened to what the boss said, wanted the boss to give them more direction and tell them what to do. And then they would adhere if they liked the boss, if they respect the boss, if they felt that they belong to that community, they definitely went through. So again, note down for yourself. I'm not going to ask to see this. This is for yourself. What do you think your culture, your country is, whether it's more of an individualistic culture or whether you think it's a collective culture. And then we'll have a look at the results that the research came up with. Here we are. So as you can see, Australia, America, Canada, Northern Europe primarily are very much individualistic. And you can see countries such as China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, also quite a few of the Central American countries in the north are very much a collective culture. So, you know, you can see the impact this might have on the leadership styles of those particular countries, and how, as an expat, you'd need to really think through how you get the people on board as followers, or how as a follower you need to be seen to be adhering to the expectations of the team and your boss. Anyone disagree with any of this? Please speak up or make a comment in the chat. Let's see if I can bring the chat down. Okay, next is masculinity versus femininity. Now, this is not about gender. This is about yin and the yang. This is about the different styles as opposed to, you know, the physiology of the individuals. So the words can be misleading, because there are many women bosses that I've had who may have displayed very masculine styles and tendencies. And there were many, many men who are also very much in touch with their sensitivity, their empathy, and all the other things that we might associate with the feminine side. So it's not necessarily about men and women in general, because there are clearly the exceptions, but it's about the concept of masculinity and the concept of femininity. So with the men, there would be the very strong ego, which clearly not for all men, but as a masculine tendency, pride, status, achievement, as opposed to relationship orientation, consensus building, and, you know, general rounded quality of life in general for you and all the people around you. A lot of this comes down to that sense of humility that John was talking about, that the overly masculine tendency of some managers means that they lack that humility, they lack that empathy to be able to see other people's perspectives, to be far more involved in their own agenda, as opposed to really being open to other people's. And the femininity element might be very helpful in creating that cooperative culture that you might need in order to bring other people on board. So again, write down what you think your country and your culture is in the scale between whether it's more masculine orientated or more femininity orientated. So here's what it looks like. So as you can see, for example, UK, Germany, Italy, Poland, and also China are extremely masculine, as the research has said. And there are countries like Spain, like Russia, that are far less, although, you know, even there, I mean, I think the lowest ones are the Scandinavia. I can see Sweden and Norway and Denmark, and definitely Netherlands are far more feminine in their way that they approach work and you know, the humility that the boss is supposed to show. So this is one dimension as well. Anything here that looks wrong to you that you want to challenge, that you think isn't right? Okay. So uncertainty avoidance is the next continuum. This is very much about how much work and effort you put in to deal with the situation in a controlled way. You want to be in control of it. And you're very anxious when you feel that you're out of control or you're not 100% sure what's going on, when it's going to happen. The outlook is that people who want to be avoiding uncertainty are far more detail oriented, far more precise, far more planful in how things get done. And people who don't care about uncertainty avoidance, the Latin term from, I don't know how to pronounce that, manana, or the Middle Eastern way of, God is great, everything will be fine in the end, or it's fated, we have no choice, it'll be how it is, and oh, it didn't happen, well, it wasn't meant to be. I mean, I hear that all the time, all over the Middle East. Or when you say to them, is something going to get done? They say, inshallah, God willing. No, I don't want, I want you to give me assurance that it's going to happen. As a British person, that's what you say. And they say, no, I told you, inshallah, that's the best I can do because I can't control everything. And that whole perspective is completely alien and causes an awful lot of friction between different nations. It's really interesting. When I was working in UK, same company, the feedback to me from my bosses was, oh, no, you do planning, but it's not detailed enough. We need to do far more detailed planning, far more precision, far more attention to detail. And then I went to live in Italy. And people in Italy saying, what's wrong with you? Why are you planning all the time? It'll be okay. We'll make it happen. Don't worry about it. And by the way, you're making so many detailed plans, you have no flexibility. And we need to have that flexibility because we don't know what's coming around the corner. As pace of change increases, clearly, those people who need for plan the uncertainty avoidance, their stress level goes up. And they become more anxious during times of change than those other people who are saying, okay, everything will be okay. We just let it be. Everything's okay. This is a very important one for me that I've experienced in the past that, even within the same continent, I mean, I find, for example, the Greek culture to be very much about uncertainty avoidance as opposed to, the Spanish or some of the other, Europeans. So this is an area. So again, note down what you think your culture is. Is it more about uncertainty avoidance, or are you okay to let things go and just go with the flow? How much risk are you willing to tolerate? And here it is. So as you can see, some particular countries are really poor at, they don't want to take any risk. China's coming up as not tolerating, ambiguity, and same, in that they're similar to the British and the Swedish, as opposed to Russia, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, South America, mostly South America, and Mexico, where you're happy to let things go and just go with the flow. Okay. Now, since this research started in the 70s, there's been further research, and 2 more dimensions have been added to the Hofstede model. And it was added by other researchers, which are noted here. The first one is time and how you view time, whether you look at things in the long term or whether you look at things in the short term, whether you're on time or in time. Sometimes people talk about it. And people who are in time are living it moment by moment, and everything needs to be about now and short term. And people who are on time are looking at it in the long term. Often cultures that have a very long history tend to take a longer perspective, because they say, well, look at all the things that we know has happened all this time. And, you know, things will go up, things will go down, but in the end, you know, it'll be okay. So in people who are long-term orientated will ask very different questions to the people who are very short-term orientated. You know, short-term people say, well, why is it happening? How do we fix it? Do it now. And they want a very quick return. They want a very immediate problem solving, which is again about the flatness of the empowerment. You know, it needs to be fixed at time, right there. Whereas people who've got a longer term perspective are asking the question, you know, where are we going? How are we going to get there? And you know, they are more willing, if you like, to be modest about what they've done, because they take a longer term perspective. This is quite a difficult one, this one, actually, because people who are short term, of course, don't act so much on principle. They react very quickly to reality and make decisions that make sense at that time, rather than stick to, no, this is the, you know, who I am and our culture and how we behave. So quite different. This is how they, they divide. Again, the countries that are in white, I don't think there's research about them. I'm not sure this is, I mean, this is very new research, so there's no data, as opposed to previous charts where, you know, the lighter color indicated something. We must be careful here. The whiter color indicates there's no data. But nevertheless, you can see the difference between the various different cultures, and you can just imagine how, you know, countries like America, Canada deal with China and Russia, as an example here, in their worldview, in the way they look at how things are being done right now. America wanting immediate results, short-term focus. I'm not going to get political and talk about whether that has implications in how their political activity in the world has been seen in the long run to be different to what they said their short-term intentions were, or how you know, China or Russia are particularly looking at the longer-term game plan, whether it's in view of building relationships with countries or whether it's to do with the strategy overall, but you can draw your own conclusions. The last dimension is pleasure. Really, how much immediate gratification you want, or no, you're willing to go through a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort for the benefit of a longer term result. And that whole idea of the immediateness of your joy or your results is very relevant to the business. In terms of, if you're making business decisions, what is the quickest turnaround time that you want on the return on that investment? As opposed to, no, I'm going to make plans that will take years and years to deliver. I'm building infrastructure that, you know, will give results back in 20 years, 25 years. I mean, education, you know, social planning. It also means that, you know, you're less willing to indulge yourself, whether it's taking a very quick joke or having fun, as opposed to, no, we're going to be very serious and make things happen that is very important to us for the long run. Again, take a few minutes to just note down what you think your culture is before I show you what the research is showing. Again, the white means no data. But look at this. The difference even between countries that are neighbors, like the difference between the British and the Irish, the difference between the Swedes and the Danes. You know, anyone who's ever been to a funeral in Ireland will tell you, or a wedding in Ireland, in fact, or whatever, about the the abandonment and joy and amount of indulgence that people go through. Often there is a religious element to this, where you know, some of the more Protestant countries, where the culture came from that element of abstinence and restraint that has stayed in their culture. Again, you know, Pakistan, China, Russia, Ukraine, you know, some of the other Eastern European countries in the Baltics are showing restraint. A lot of the Americas, Australia, Nigeria, interestingly enough, Saudi Arabia are not. They're about immediate enjoyment. It's really interesting for me because I worked in, I did a lot of work in Saudi Arabia for many, many years. And a lot of my Saudi friends, quite frankly, wouldn't be saving money. They'd be spending everything they earned all the time and living beyond their means, right at the edge. Because you know, and again, it happens in countries like Iran, where I'm from, where you think you don't know what the world is coming tomorrow. For all I know, tomorrow the world could end. So I'm going to enjoy everything now. Although Iran is more in the middle here, I think it's the difference between some of the more religious rather than some of the non-religious Iranians have made that average. Okay, so these are the 6 dimensions that I wanted to share with you as a model for you to be able to use as a tool, right? Yes, there is research there. You can go online, have a look at it. There's tons and tons of stuff about this. And these are academic research which are properly referenced and properly researched together. But the reason for me to show you this is because I want you as future global leaders to have a tool that you could use. There are tools online for this, where you could assess yourself so that you know what your preference is. And that is, again, a very important first step in self-awareness about what cultures suit me the most. And then understanding the other cultures you might be dealing with so that you have a chance of adjusting your way of operating to be able to communicate with them better, to be able to persuade them better, and to be able to be more trusting and better relationship that develops more win-win. Okay? Now, I'm going to say the most important thing in this whole lecture now. So please pay attention. The differences within any national culture is many times greater than the difference between national cultures. I'm going to say that one more time. Within a country culture, there is a far greater variation than the difference between that culture and its neighbor. I have lived in 8 different countries. And once you live in that country, once you're working in that country, I mean, I've worked in 23 different countries, visited 65, but once you've lived somewhere, you very quickly realize that, my God, the stereotype, the caricature that we talked about at the beginning of this discussion is completely and utterly wrong, because there is a range between the different regions, between the different genders, between the different classes, between the different education levels, between the levels of wealth, between the generations that are so different to each other, to make that caricature nothing but what it is, a caricature to be laughed at and not taken seriously. Now, that doesn't mean that all the stuff we talked about in the last 40 minutes is rubbish. No, they're true on the average, but you mustn't go in there with a presupposition that you've known these people, because that's wrong. That's the pitfall. That's the danger, that you go in there with ideas that will land you in trouble. And you need to be open. You need to go in there and judge for yourself. Who is this person sitting next to me? Are they the stereotype? How are they different to each other? And that realization of that range within the culture is really important in keeping you safe from making mistakes that will cost you in terms of relationships, in terms of business, and that would be wrong. Okay, so that's the first thing. And why is that? The reason is that we all have prejudices. It's human. Every single place we go to, we judge them through filters. So how do we see the world? We see the world that our physiology as human beings allow us to experience. It's what we see, whether we see ourselves on television or whatever we see, things that we've heard, things that we feel, things we've smelled, and things we've tasted. Those are the only senses that we know of. Yes, people talk about the sixth sense, but hang on, we talk about things that we can test and prove. Those 5 ways of seeing the world dictate to us our model of what the world is like and our place in it. In order for you to communicate effectively and build trust with someone, you need to gauge their view of the world. We've just talked about all the different ways of looking at it from a national perspective. How do they see the world? How do they see themselves in that view of the world? And how do they see yours the same way you see theirs? In order for you to truly connect and build trust and build a win-win relationship, you need to be able to communicate together so that you create that trust that John talked about. But you're not making decisions and having things happen through reality. It's your perception of reality. And that is driven, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, by the information you were given about these people, about the history, about things that happened, about examples that have been written about in the newspapers, or your parents told you about, or what their sports team did one time, or whatever. And your brain would normally put the filter in to gather information that is primarily in line with your original perception. So if you had a belief about some people that was negative, you would gather mostly information that would allow you to reinforce that view. And your brain would either delete information that didn't fit into it, distort it, or use generalizations to excuse alternative things that you've seen that don't fit in with your worldview. These things happen automatically. It happens to all of us as human beings. And the best thing we can do is be aware of it, because once you're aware of it, you can make sure that you modify it. Because what this first filter does is it creates your value system. It creates your beliefs about yourself, your culture, and others. And it makes sense of the experiences. It almost creates false memories. You know, 2 different people seeing the same event will have very different memories of it, because they would have had that experience go through the first filter and the second filter. And that affects the mental view you have of the world, yourself, and others in it as that grows. Does that make sense? So it's really, really important that we create that awareness and we create that ability for you not to allow too much deletion, too much distortion, too much generalizations, so that your perception of the world varies too far or locks you into a decision or way of looking at the world that stops you growing and experiencing a win. In fact, I would say this to you. Remember what we said at the beginning about traveling and journey? I used to move a lot of people from country to country. And the first time someone goes to a new country is far more difficult, far more shocking than someone like me who's moved 8 countries. You know, your perceptions and your limits that you place yourself break down every time you expose yourself. You know, you're growing up in Iran as I was as a boy, and they're giving you a perception of what Turks are like, what Arabs are like. And believe me, those are mostly negative because of what we said at the beginning. And then you go and live in Turkey and you find wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people who are still lifelong friends. You find amazing people in Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, in Dubai, in Egypt, in all the places that you thought were different to you. And all your experiences are helping you break down those beliefs, those systems that will hold you back and make you less happy. Now, I have known individuals who went into those situations and utterly burnt, got destroyed, because they went in without allowing control over the filters. They're stuck with the presuppositions. They saw all the other experiences, alternative ways of seeing the world and doing things as negative. Maybe this is helpful to the case study that we're going to talk about this afternoon, later on, about Samsung and its experience in Mexico. Any issues about this? It is really important because this is the crunch of it in terms of what we're talking about. So let's talk about what we mean by culture. We've talked about the different national cultures. This is also true of company cultures. So cultures have many layers. I mean, this is Samuel's view of seeing things through other people's eyes. This is true of countries. It's also true of companies. Because once you're in it, it's difficult for you to see things from the outside unless you go out and look back in. There are 4 metaphors for cultures. There's the culture of we're all together under this umbrella. And the umbrella is the company, is the country, is whatever makes us as a group protected from the rest of the world. And we're all under this umbrella together. You know, this is the overarching way that identity of this group is defined, the overarching, it's the umbrella. Second metaphor is glue. It's what brings us all together, makes us all part of this community with the same sense of belonging, whether it's a tribe, whether it's a company, whether it's a religion, whether it's a national culture, whatever it is, there is a glue that brings you all together, and that's culture. The third metaphor is onion. You know, the fact that cultures have many layers. There's the superficial element that you see, and then the more you get to know it, the more layers you see, the more complexity you see. And in the high context cultures, like the Iranians, like the Chinese, there are many more layers. I mean, I think the Italians say that you could, for example, understand the language and speak it at 4 different levels of sophistication, whereas Persian would be 8 levels of sophistication. I often heard about the onion reference when I was young, talking about the Chinese culture. I spent many years sharing a flat with some Chinese boys, An and Leng, and then with another Chinese gentleman called Kwok. And this was what I'd heard mentioned. I have, of course, visited and got exposed to Chinese culture more since then, but they used to talk about how the superficial element can be misleading. Then you need to be prepared for the deeper levels and not to take the superficial as the end all and be all. I mean, lots of the British would go to Hong Kong and would think the Cantonese culture is it. That defines Chinese culture, and clearly it doesn't. The last metaphor is the iceberg, which is very similar to the onion for me, because what it says is that what you see is what's visible above the water. And that if you want to really understand the culture, you need to delve deeper to understand what's underlying it, what's driving it. Okay, so far, any comments?
Sorry.
Please tell me.
The slide doesn't move.
The slide doesn't move. Does it move now?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this is the. I'm now on the slide that says definition of culture, and there are 3 different definitions of culture for you to choose whichever one works for you best. If anyone can't see this slide, let me know, please. So it is about shared experiences, according to the first one. It's the way people solve problems, according to Shine. Or it's the collective programming of your mind, a mindset, a mental map of themselves and their place in the world, which is what Hofstede talks about. And the important thing is it drives habits. It drives what they do because it's their belief that drives it. So these are definitions of cultures. Now, there are all kinds of jokes and, again, stereotypes to do with companies, about how companies structure themselves and how those companies work in different cultures. And again, in exactly the same way as we talked about the Hofstede model, some of it, there is a grain of truth in it, but there are so many exceptions to this. And again, we need to take all of these things with a pinch of salt. Has anyone come across the monkey experiment as the way of defining culture? Has anyone heard about that? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. The experiment was to put some monkeys in a cage. And then the researcher had a ladder, and then a bunch of bananas would appear on top of the ladder. And any monkey who attempted to climb the ladder, all the monkeys were absolutely doused with very cold, high-pressure water. So it would make them really unhappy and make them really uncomfortable. And they did this every time any of these monkeys tried to climb the ladder, until the monkeys learned not to climb the ladder, because if they tried to climb the ladder to get the banana, they get doused with this water. What happened was that became the culture for those monkeys. What they then did was they replaced one of the monkeys with a new monkey who had never experienced the water before. And of course, that monkey sees the banana and runs to try and get up the ladder to collect the banana. And the other monkeys beat up that monkey because they know what's going to happen. They know that if this monkey gets to the top, they're all going to get doused with cold water. And the new monkey learns not to climb because if they try to climb, the other monkeys beat them up. They went through and they replaced one by one every single monkey until there were no monkeys left in that cage who had ever experienced the water dousing them and making them uncomfortable. And yet, all of those monkeys would still beat up any monkey who tried to climb the ladder, even though they didn't know why. Because none of them had experienced the water. That is culture. The culture of that team, of those monkeys, was you don't climb the ladder to pick up the banana. And they'd forgotten why. But it's just the way things are done here. And my experience is that's what you get all the time. That's what actually happens. You create norms. You create a value system that says you don't climb the ladder as an individual. You don't go for that banana. It's not the done thing here. All those patterns of behavior are very strongly given to you and is aligned with what the whole of the monkeys and all the organization does. Now, here's the thing. Culture is often used to define why some businesses are successful or not successful. I mean, I don't know whether you've come across this phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Have you come across that before? It's from Harvard Business School. Strategy is changeable. Strategy about products, route to market, pricing, brand, promotion, whatever it is, can be copied, changes over time. and has a shelf life. I mean, we talk about 3 to 5 year strategies. Some people have 10-year strategies, but really those strategies are constantly changing and evolving. The culture also evolves, but the idea is, and if you remember from the last lecture where we talked about good to great, that the leadership culture that is developed and defines how that organization works and how that organization sees itself as different to the rest of its competition in the same market and outperforms them over generations, that is the surer way of being successful, because culture is difficult to copy, difficult to replicate, and quite frankly, once you live it, you know, creates that USP of what it makes you different as a company. So what do we say about this? What if you've got a whole range of cultures that are really, really different? I mean, I worked for Coca-Cola for 6 years, and I can tell you that people who worked for Pepsi, they had a very different culture. And a lot of the people, when they tried to come in from that culture into the other culture, found it very difficult to adjust and be successful. Now, some cultures have more range. Some cultures are really narrow. It's not a one size fits all. And the research now has evolved to say, yes, you do need a clear culture that defines your identity as an organization, as a team. But within that, you need to have range. Otherwise, you're too inflexible. And like anything that's inflexible, you can't adjust to the changing market and the outside world, and you die. And you make very narrow decisions based on the view of very few, as opposed to taking a broader view that allows you to adhere to the changing circumstances. So a culture that is clearly defined, that actually encompasses a range, is what they're now saying as the latest idea of what is a great culture for success. So that comes from the assumptions of that culture, from the original CEO who set it up and grew it, or the founder of that company, and what they said about it. Remember, it's very similar to the experience of the monkeys. And what the other people see outside is the output as opposed to input of the culture. This is a model from Cranfield Business School. It's one of many, many models that say, okay, how do you know what the culture is? It's because all of these things, these different elements, are integrated and synced together. The symbolism, you know, do you have senior executive dining room and, you know, parking spaces? You know, it just shows you're hierarchical, you know, how decisions are made, whether what the, you know, charter of authority is, how broad the roles are, how flat the organization is, how communication happens, how connected the senior managers are with the teams, all these other things. And a really good indication is how well integrated all of this is. I mean, the number of organizations I go to where what they say their culture is not how the organizational structure is set up, or how their assessment and reward structure is designed to reinforce those behaviors or not. Most of the time, what they say about their culture is different to the reality of the culture. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Say you worked in a company and a friend of yours or a member of your family decides they want to work for that company. And they come and ask you, what's it like to work there? I'm willing to bet that very quickly you'll be able to come with 3 or 4 words that describe what it's like to work there. Yeah, it's great to work here because, or it's a terrible place to work because, bang, bang, bang. But none of the companies are saying that on their value statements, on the statements they have that describe their culture. I don't know a single company that doesn't say customers are kings and queens and most important people in the world, or our people are our most important asset. There is a technical phrase for those phrases that are designed by a PR team or HR team and put on posters, on walls, or on little toys on people's desks. You know, customers are everything to us, and our people are our best, you know, recipe for success in the future, most important things in our future. It's nonsense. Because it's all aspirational. And the reality is not what people are feeling on the ground. I mean, you might have heard all about the exploitative stories coming about Amazon and how their employees are saying things about them. But you see the corporate video and have a look at what they've put in there. And interestingly enough, it's not so much what your culture is that's important. It's how much of a distance there is between what you say and you tell people to expect and reality. That's what the difference. If you have a really difficult culture, but you tell people this is where we are, people don't expect anything else and they adhere to it. Whereas if you tell them, expect us to be gold standard, and then you give them something else, even a little bit less, people feel cheated. People feel that wasn't the deal. I never forget, in the early days of Vodafone, people who joined, and I would used to recruit them and induct them, and they used to say, oh my God, I can't believe it. I thought I'd be coming into a real high-tech company with really fancy offices of glass and stone, and I'd be given the latest phone, and my computer would be the best, and the software and all the systems would all be working beautifully, and that's what I expect, because that's the image outside. This is a technology company in the fastest growing sector of technology, telecommunication, in 1998 to 2003, 2004. And what they came in was, oh my God, I've got better phone than this at home. My systems at home and my laptop is better than what you're giving me. And what I hadn't realized is this company had doubled in size every single year, and it had taken a long time for people to catch up. And the systems weren't ready. The processes were not there because we were doubling in size every single year. It was just keeping on top of the wave, like we talked about last week. It wasn't, not Vodafone's fault, and eventually we caught up, but the expectation was different. And that difference in expectation causes a problem. The idea of this web is that all of those things need to be in harmony together and reinforcing each other, as opposed to working against each other, which often you find in companies. So that's how you build a great culture. You develop an organizational culture where things are congruent, where the national institutions are very clearly defined. The actions of the founders are recognized, and people say, right, this CEO or this chairman or this founder or these early people or the family owner who set it all up, this was who it was, and this is their perspective of life. And that's how you communicate those values. And you define them. My advice normally when I'm asked as a consultant is to say, find out what the truth is and build the next step in its evolution. Don't go too far in the future, which is not in touch with reality, because values are like brands. They're the internal definition of brands. They're the other side of the coins to the brands. And what do we say about brands? A brand is what a brand does. Your brand will not survive long if the values that brand is associated with is not replicated in the services and the products that the customer experiences. And exactly the same thing is true of the culture. If the values and culture you say that you're going to have is different to what the people are experiencing, you lose engagement. You will lose the discretionary effort. You will lose the talent. So all of that is really important, is socializing people into the reality, but also the next version of that reality. You improve that substantially by moving people around the organization, because that stops silos being built up. It also allows people to experience that culture in its many guises. And you also don't tolerate people who are clearly different to what your brand and your culture says you should be. So what we talked about again last week about Jack Walsh's idea of getting the bottom 10% out, although he was talking more about performance. In the version that I did in Vodafone, it was very much around adhering to our leadership's way, our culture, and people who are out of step with it, either improving them or allowing them to move elsewhere. So let's talk about the other element, which is human needs. The reason that at this stage I want to talk about this is because in every single country I've ever gone to in order to lead a team or solve a problem, the first thing I've heard from people is, yep, I know you've got great experience. I know you come with lots of different skills, but you don't know what it's like here. This is Saudi Arabia. We're different. This is Japan. We're different. This is Iran. We're different. This is Italy. We're Italians. We do things our way. And what that says to me is that the readiness for change isn't there, that they're thinking through, you know, all the reasons why not. The glass is half empty rather than half full. And a lot of the time they've been right. I mean, I remember when I went into the Netherlands, I went in with the 5th CEO. They had 4 CEOs in 4 years. And none of the CEOs and the team that they took with them had been able to turn that company around. And most of those reasons, and also the reasons why Vodafone eventually had to sell Japan, was cultural, not to do with the product, not to do with the systems. It was cultural. In Turkey, the reason why that particular company had lost half its value, $3 billion in 2 years, was because the management hadn't listened to the Turks, hadn't really understood the culture they were operating. So it was important. And yet, once you go in and really look at what's going wrong, you realize it's not meeting these human needs. And these human needs are basic, really basic. So you go in and say, okay, what's happening here? Do people feel safe to be able to really tell you what the truth is without worrying about their jobs being lost? Do they have a sense of long-term belonging? Do they feel that they're recognized and they're appreciated for what they're trying to do? Or are they building their CVs for the next job because they're not actualized here? I will talk about why culture is still important once we've gone through this. But I want to really go back and talk about the basics that are often the reason why companies are not successful. And those basics are to do with us as humans. Now, this is Maslow's, the most common model for understanding human needs. And it's a hierarchy. The idea is you need to meet the bottom ones first before you can then meet the next one, and so on and so forth. So you can't really be self-actualized if you can't breathe, if you are short of basics, if you're not feeling safe, if you don't feel that you're in a team that belongs, if you don't feel you're recognized. That's the idea. But I found another model, which is by a gentleman called Burton, which I like maybe a little bit more. And it talks about us as human beings, very similar to Maslow, but slightly different words, needing certainty. So all those people that go on about how scary change is and how no people are change orientated, let me tell you something. If you are driving the change and you are in charge of making the change happen, you're not afraid of it. You're 100% change orientated. It's only the people who've got change being done to them, where they're uncertain about what's going on, that are against change. Challenges. Do you feel stimulated? Is the job interesting? Do you feel that, you know, you're doing things that are varied enough, that you're not bored? Do you feel that you're being treated as a human being, with your whole being being taken care of, rather than you're just a resource? That's why I hate the term HR, human resources, because I'm sitting at a table. This table, I don't have to worry about how it's feeling. Yeah, okay, I might need to varnish it from time to time, but actually, when human beings are not the same as this, like we said, human beings make decisions based on their perception, not reality. Human beings make emotional decisions. Leadership is very much about the followers wanting to follow you. That's an emotional decision. So the need for connectivity. Then there is the spiritual element. Do I feel I'm growing? Do I feel that I'm maturing? Do I feel that my contribution is appreciated? Am I significant? So these are the things. Now, most of the time, we find that when things have gone wrong with the culture, it's because of the leadership. I mean, we said that in the first and second session. The thing that drives the culture is primarily leadership, at least 70%. And those leaders, here's the question for them. Is there any culture in the world where it doesn't matter if the employee doesn't know what's expected of them? It doesn't matter if the follower doesn't know how well they're doing or how else they could be stimulated, where it doesn't matter if you are not appreciating someone's achievement, where it's not important to someone that they're making a significant difference, that what they do matters. Is there any nation in the world where those individuals don't want to grow, don't want to progress, don't want to learn? I'll put it to you, there is nowhere in the world where these human needs are not uniformly needed, and that leaders on the whole don't do them. Don't do them. Because they focus on the management. They focus on control. They focus on the budgets. They focus on the KPIs. They don't focus on their people as managers. They focus on the task, which is what we said last week, on primarily. Good leaders do. I'll just tell a very quick story. I learned this a long while back. It wasn't natural to me. That remember, we might have talked about this last week, that often you're taught, especially in the Western Anglo-Saxon way, that you have to be balanced and you have to give feedback to people that says, this is what you're good at, this is what you're bad at, and what you're bad at, you need to improve. Logic. And somebody once told me, why don't you forget about what's bad? Just focus on the good. Just go and tell someone, I saw you do this. You were absolutely brilliant. Well done. Do more. Do you think the individual doesn't know what they're bad at? That you need to tell them all the time? Sometimes they don't, but most of the time they do. Do you think they come to work to do a bad job? Everybody wants to do a good job if they feel motivated and if they feel enabled. Have you motivated them? Have you enabled them? I had an amazing guy, absolutely amazing person on my team, Jiten. And I ran into him and his family in the supermarket one day. And I said hello, and he introduced me to his family. This is my boss, etc. And I bent down, shake hands with his little boy, and I said, have you got any idea how amazing your dad is? I want you to be really proud of him. I am very proud to have him in my team. He is absolutely phenomenal. He gives his best all the time. He is so innovative. He is so brilliant. And I really appreciate him. And I turned around to his wife and I said, I know he's been working late and I know it's very difficult for you as a family. And I want to say that I really appreciate you and your tolerance for this and letting him contribute to us. And I appreciate that in you. It cost me nothing to say that. It cost me nothing to go around the production lines and say to the teams, I saw your figures. They were absolutely bloody brilliant and well done. And thank you. And, you are brilliant. It costs nothing. But people don't do it. To this day, I don't know why they don't do it. It's so easy. It's so amazing. And Jiten, I mean, last week he's communicating with me, to his end of his days, we're friends. And isn't that wonderful? And it costs nothing. And most of the time, what's going wrong in businesses is not to do with the culture. It's to do with these basics. However, how you do these things, how you say these things, is culturally significant. Whether you approach a woman in Saudi Arabia, how you approach them, how you say well done and thank you in Netherlands in a very direct culture, as opposed to, I don't know, in a high context culture, talking in very poetic, flowery terms about how great they are. there is a cultural element to social distancing, how close you are, whether you're allowed to touch someone's elbow or hand, whether you shake hands. I mean, in Iran, we always say, wait for the lady to extend their hand first, because then you know whether they shake hands or they're religious, they don't shake hands, as an example. All of these things are cultural and they're important. They're really important. But what you do is human needs. And they go right across cultures because we're all human beings. It's what we said at the beginning. Yes, we're all different because that's the wrapping, that's the culture, that's our belief system, that's our perception. But we're also all the same because we're all human. So, create joy. It'll come back to you. It'll come back to you. Being a great leader is one of the most fulfilling things, and especially globally, that you could ever do. And if you put effort into it, if you put your ego aside, if you put your presuppositions aside, and you go out there and you take a risk and you open up to other people, they will give it back to you in buckets. So, the case study. What do we think about Samsung in Mexico? I actually did a bit of work for Samsung, and I also spent 3 weeks in Mexico looking at all the Coca-Cola factories, which are the best Coca-Cola factories in the world. So I have some experience of both Mexico and of Samsung. I don't know if anybody else has experience of either working with Mexicans or Koreans, or whether they have worked in these companies before. If you do, please share. What do we think? What was the difference between these cultures? What caused the culture clash? If you can use the Hofstede model to describe it, please do. This is the case study. I can't talk about this myself, otherwise there's no point. You guys need to share. What do you guys think? That's where the learning comes from. Anyone, anything. Anyone there?
Sorry, sir, I can't see the slides. I want to know is the first question about the case study.
Yeah, I'm just saying, what was the cultural differences that caused the issue? What conclusion can you draw about possible differences in the nature of work and the culture? So what was different between the cultures, between the Mexican and the Korean cultures that caused the problem? Can you not see the slide?
I think the difference is in Mexican the leader is like parents. They need to take care about the emotion of the employees, but for the Korean, they just need their employees to finish their job. They don't care about how they think.
Yeah, very good. Really, really good. So the expectations were different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I came to work one day, and one of my employees, who is still a dear, dear friend, she was crying at the desk, and I took her out for a cup of tea or coffee just to see if everything's okay. And she said her father was going bankrupt, and they were going to lose everything. I lent her some money to make sure that her father doesn't go bankrupt. And in Turkey, you are very much in a collective culture like that, and you need to behave that way. In UK, that expectation would never be there. And I think you're right. The Koreans were in there thinking, this is work, you guys need to work and deliver the results. The Mexicans were saying, no, we're whole human beings and you need to deal with us as whole human beings. I think you're absolutely right. Anybody got a different perspective? So what do we think the um, what was the motivation of each one of the groups? What did the Koreans want to achieve? What was the Mexicans' motivations? What did they want to do? I think we've almost said it. So the motivation of the Mexicans is a long-term happy sort of community where they're all working together, and the Koreans' expectation is short-term. Again, if we talk about the Hofstede model, they want the results and they want the short-term results. I'm gonna shortcut all of this. If you are a consultant brought in to fix this situation, what advice would you give to the management in Samsung? Do you think they should hire more Mexican managers? Do you think they should increase the pay of the Mexicans? What do you think? This is the final question, but the overall question. You're a consultant going in to advise them on how to solve this problem. What would you do?
I think probably they can just leave that place, like develop these manufacturers to like East Asia.
Yes.
He's a Mexican, because like the labor cost is quite important in the initial cost.
Yes.
It increases quite a lot. I think it doesn't worse to stay at that place again. So I think better to move to the East Asia, like have the cheap labor will be better to Samsung as a choice.
Well, when you're a global company, especially now with post-COVID world, you need a supply chain that's very diverse because you reduce your risk.
Yeah.
So I mean, I used to run a company that had 17 different country operations, and we had 4 different factories in Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Dubai. Actually, 5. And the cost of basis in each country was different. The rules of engagement are different from country to country, but different countries had different access to different raw material, different supply chain, different regulations. And if you had a big enough market in that particular place, it would make sense. And plus, you get all kinds of benefits from the government in putting a factory and creating employment in the companies. So for a global company, the #1 white goods company in the world, they're like Samsung, the idea of limiting their manufacturing only to one part of the world where they're selling everywhere in the world is a strategic risk. Okay, so yes, you could say, and I agree with you, we will do primarily the bulk of our, if you like, manufacturing in an environment that is the cheapest and the best for our type of product and our operation. But nevertheless, if you want to be a global company as a culture, you want to be able to work globally. And if you can't even manage a factory in Mexico, how do you think you're dealing with the sales in Mexico? Because it's the same culture, right? And you'll have sales team there who'll have similar problems as the manufacturing team. And maybe your brand perception in those countries will not work because you've somehow offended them. A global company needs a global perspective, is what I'm saying. So yes, you could say one strategy, one option, and that's definitely an option, is to close the company in Mexico and come back and manufacture things in Southeast Asia. I think that might be a short-term solution. In the long term, it's better for Samsung to grow and mature and become a global company as opposed to remaining a Korean or Southeast Asian company. What else? What else do you think we should do? Do you think they should keep the same Korean managers managing the factory in Mexico with all the workers being Mexican?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, what do you think should happen?
I think need to combine the both Korean manager and the Mexican managers. These
very good.
Like strategies need to be made by the management system instead of like the problem need to be fixed in the management system instead of with the employees. Like, you know, like career management can like have set their target, and Mexico management managers can like combine the local traditions and to change the target or make some changes to suitable for the local employees. That's what I think.
Yes, I think I agree with you 100%. I think diversity, a mix of some Mexican managers with Korean managers, would help the Korean managers learn how the Mexican managers are managing Mexican workers.
Yes.
Diversity is always a strength in situations where you know, you have unknowns, because it gives you more options, more choices. You get more perspectives. I used to work for a Japanese company called Yaohan, and I was the most senior non-Japanese person in that company for 6 years. And you know, the strength of that particular company at the time, it was owned by a family called the Wada family, you know, the brothers. And you know, I used to know them, and they used to ask me, what do you think will work there? I mean, we used to do morning assembly every morning for about 890 people to sing the company song in Japanese, sing the national anthems, do exercise, do announcement, whatever. It was so counter to the UK way of actually working. But the way you do it, the way you make it fun, the way you make it different but acceptable, the way you make it something that the employees want to participate in, is the art. And the Japanese listened to me about that. They didn't do it the way they did it in Southeast Asia or Japan. They did it the way we culturally wanted to do that task. And it's very interesting. One of the strategies that I would really recommend to you is called meta up, because you get this perspective, right? You get the Koreans in this scenario with their mentality, you know, we need these results. This is a very expensive factory. We've promised to deliver returns of this. And the Mexicans are not letting us. They're causing us problems. And by the way, we've set this factory up many places in the world. They've all worked. It's not working here, and it's the fault of the Mexicans. And the Mexicans are there saying, these people have come. This is Mexico. They're trying to force the Korean way or other people's way of doing things on us, and we don't like it. If you take that and say you as a consultant were to bring the Koreans and the Mexicans together, you'd say, you all want this factory to be successful, right? If the factory is successful, the Mexican workers keep their jobs, they grow, they get more pay rises. The Koreans are seen to have delivered what they promised, and they're delivering the company's success. So do we all first agree that we have to work together to make this factory successful? Unless they agree to that, you can't then come down and say, right, what's causing the problem? What can we do about it? Second thing I would say is, imagine those Korean workers who've been to Mexico and not adjusted themselves to the Mexican way to be successful there, had to be sent to another country. Unless they learned their lessons and grew as leaders and as managers in Mexico, you don't have the capability building within Samsung to grow globally. And you know, sometimes you need to bite the bullet and say, okay, we failed at a particular country, but what we gained was the capability and the knowledge and the know-how of how to be successful next time when we go to another culture. If you admit defeat and just pull the Korean managers out and put Mexican managers in, you defeat that purpose, because the Koreans go back as defeated managers and not having learned anything. Final thing I would say to you is this. It feels to me like it's not a matter of Korean way of leading and the Mexican way of leading. It feels to me in this case study, I don't know if you agree, that the Koreans aren't leading, they're being managers. And what the Mexicans want are leaders. Because what did we say was the difference? The leader is an emotional connectivity, which is what the Mexicans say. This person cares about me and I care about this person. I want to be led by this person. Whereas the Koreans are managers. They're driving through systems and KPIs, and they're not dealing with the emotional side of things at all. So this is not a case of Mexican leadership versus Korean leadership. If there were great Korean leaders, they would be successful here, but they're not, they're being managers. Does anyone disagree with that? Anyway, great case study. I thought it was a very good illustration of how great global leaders can make the difference in a successful global business strategy versus failing and burning. And I've seen so much of it. I've seen so much of the wrong way of doing things. So here's my take on how you become successful global leaders. First, remember what I said. Don't go with presuppositions that I know what this Italian guy, I know what this Chinese guy, I know what this Indian guy, what this Iranian guy, British guy is going to be like. Park those filters. Be aware of them and mitigate them. Look at it as leadership, and how leadership is an emotional journey, and you need to emotionally connect with this culture. So it's what John said. I used to have these people go to Egypt and say, oh, I've been to Egypt 50 times. I've never seen the pyramids. And honestly, the Egyptian friends of mine used to be really offended by that. Really offended. Why aren't you learning any Turkish when you're living in Turkey? You know, it's disrespectful, and really being accepting of those things. Leadership is really important because it's an emotional journey. Remember about personality types and cultural differences. Remember about the individuals and look at them as individuals. Understand the mindset before you open your mouth. Soak it in. They talk about the first 90 days. Really, read as much about the history, read as much about the place, taste the food, you know, go out there into the society, see what's going on, soak it in, try and understand it before you make decisions. And these are the 20 things, according to Marshall Goldsmith, that really looks at it. Be careful of, oh, I know what I'm doing because I'm always winning. I've added so much value in the past. It's these people's fault. It's what we said just now. It's quick judgments, making very destructive comments. Oh, all Saudi Arabians are terrible to their women. That's not true. You know, all Muslims are this, all Chinese are this. These are all wrong. These are all bad. Remember the little caricature video we showed at the beginning? These are all terrible. Showing off, speaking too quickly when you're angry, focusing on the negative. Any country you go to, there'll be some things that are comfortable for you, some things that are less comfortable. Focus on the things that you're enjoying. Don't withhold information. Share, listen. Give recognition as much as possible. You use their human needs. Give them credit. Always be at cause. I am the one who can make a difference. I'm the one that has a choice of different behavior. Don't make excuses. Don't think about your success in the past. This is one of my biggest learnings. Having successfully done things in Netherlands, I went into Turkey with a little bit of cockiness, and then everything I tried in the first 6 months was a terrible mistake. It's not about the past. It's not about arrogance. It's about being open. Don't play favorite. This person speaks my language. This person likes my culture. I'm going to like them back. You can't help that, but you've got to open yourself up to the others. If you make a mistake, put your hand up and say, I made a mistake. Believe me, people will think more of you. Listening with empathy. We talked about this before. It's really important to actively listen. Express yourself. Don't punish people for being different. Don't pass the bucks. And you know, it's really, really important for you to be you, but be a better version of you. Better version of you. So, with cultural perspectives, in a difference in perspective, use the tool that I gave you. Please do, because that's what it's designed to. Be aware of your own preferences and then adapt your style to the culture that you want to be winning in. So that's about being curious, listening, showing empathy, checking your assumptions, and finding a way. Be patient. It takes time. And try and enjoy the ride. Honestly, by the time you've done 1 or 2 moves, it becomes unbelievably pleasurable. So that's the end of our lecture today. The next lecture, we're talking about leadership development. This is important in two ways. One, for you as global leaders yourself, how best to develop yourselves, but also as leaders, as we said before about the spiritual need of followers, to grow your people, how best to grow your people. We have a gentleman called Adney Callahan that has been developing leaders globally for many, many years, who's going to talk to us from his perspective. And we're going to have a case study. Case study is about Google and IBM, and it'll be on Minerva. And it's the most essential thing to read because we're going to talk about it during the lecture. There will be some two articles that I've also put on Minerva, and there's a YouTube. And these slides, of course, will also be on Minerva going forward. And there's other things, sources, if you're interested. So that's the end of our lecture. Any last questions? Anything else?
Dear sir, may I ask you a question? Yeah, may I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, please go ahead.
As you mentioned earlier, if the company is successful, so employees can get higher wages. But in effect, higher productivity is not associated with salary, and thus most employees cannot get motivation.
Well, yeah, I see your point completely. You're absolutely right. You motivate your employees based on the reality of the situation. In some places, you go for monetary. Monetary, in my view, is what they call the hygiene effect. I don't know if you've come across that in the past. Money is often a demotivator if they feel they're being cheated. It's all about the psychological deal. What's the psychological deal working here? So how much of a job security do I have? How much recognition do I get? How much learning, how much growth and development do I get? All those different human needs. Some of it is money and physiological, some of it is not. You need to have a balanced approach that's most appropriate to those people and what their expectation is. It's sometimes money and sometimes it isn't. So my normal take is I always double check whether their expectations are correct. Because let me give you an example. You ask anybody how much you think their fair wage for their work is, and they'll say the top 10% salary for that job. Why? Because you always associate yourself with the best paid person in the market. But clearly, any salary has a range. There's the bottom percentile, there's the top percentile. Their expectations are always the top percentile. So management of expectations, and having been a people director for so many different companies, I've always communicated. I said, look, as a company, we will ensure that you get at least the right wage for the market so that we're not cheating any of you. However, here's how performance is rewarded. Here's how additional profitability is shared. Here's how long-term retention is rewarded. Here's how innovative contribution of new ideas is rewarded. Some of those rewards are monetary, some of them are not. Some people, I used to organize holidays for them and their families to go away. Some salespeople, I used to rent them cars to drive over the weekend. You know, here's a Ferrari for you to drive. It depends what you think is the critical way of emotionally connecting with that person and that group in that culture. You know, in Middle East, I sent a lot of people for the Mecca pilgrimage and paid for that because that's what it worked there. Most of the time, I would say giving them what they expect is the minimum. Giving them something they don't expect has multiple emotional connections. So one of the things I used to do was I used to send gifts, chocolate or flowers to their other partner if they've been working overtime or if they've been really successful, to say your your partner has done great things. We know that you're supporting them at home. Here's our appreciation for you, because they weren't expecting it. You know, bring your child to work day. In Italy, we had that. And then we would have clowns, we'd have games. It has massive connectivity and emotional engagement to the company. In Vodafone, we used to have an annual party. 13,000 people in a black tie dinner, and we used to have the best bands playing, pay for everyone to stay in hotels. Come on, it used to cost £4.5 million for a party once a year. It's in the Guinness Book of Records. It doesn't matter. You have different solutions depending on the culture. I hope I've answered your question. It's not always pay. You're right. Anything else?
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. That's the end of our lecture for today. The next lecture will, of course, be next Tuesday, same time, same link. We will be allocating teams of 4 for the group assessment. If you guys don't write to us by the end of this week with your own selected team of 4, one of the people from the team of 4 should write to us to say that this is our team and this is what we're going to do. And then at that point, we will, that would be the team for the 30% assessment. Otherwise, we would randomly select 4 people to work together. And then at that point, you need to be self-managing, get together, decide what the topic is, decide how you're going to do it for the sessions on the 13th and 14th of December for the recorded Zoom presentation of 20 minutes with 16 slides. Just thought I'd highlight that to you as well. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. And look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's not going away. It's not shutting. It's not letting me shut. I don't know what's going on.
What happened?
I don't know.
Close
The
Zoom.
Zoom is not shutting. Don't worry about it. You guys can exit. That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Stop sharing. All right, it's back now. Stop the recording.